This is a story that deserves everyone's attention because, mostly, we don't expect evil to arrive quietly. We imagine chaos when something terrible happens. Broken glass, screams, alarms. But sometimes, the most disturbing crimes begin in silence. A door closes, a light goes out, a life vanishes, and by the time anyone notices, it's already too late. On the night of January 31st, 2026, in the quiet, upscale community of Catalina Foothills, just outside Tucson, Arizona, everything seemed normal, peaceful even. The kind of neighborhood where nothing bad ever really happens. But sometime between 9:50 p.m. and the early hours of the morning, something did happen. Something calculated, something violent. And the victim was known to be Nancy Guthrie. To understand the weight of this case, we have to understand Nancy herself, not just as a victim, but as a person. Nancy Ellen Long, later known as Nancy Guthrie, was 84 years old. She wasn't fragile in spirit. By all accounts, she was sharp, independent, and deeply rooted in her community. We can picture her life, decades spent in Tucson after moving there in the early 1970s. A long marriage to her husband Charles cut tragically short in 1988 when he died during a mining expedition in Mexico. From that point on, Nancy carried on, raising her children, building a life, adapting to loss in a way only resilient people can. She had 3 children. One of them, Savannah Guthrie, would become a nationally recognized journalist. But Nancy herself wasn't defined by her daughter's fame. She was known locally, present, consistent. A regular churchgoer, a neighbor, a mother, a woman who lived alone, but not in isolation. Yet there was another side to her situation, one that would later become critically important. At 84, Nancy had limited mobility. She relied on daily medication for a chronic condition. She couldn't walk far on her own, which means one thing becomes immediately clear to us. Nancy Guthrie did not simply disappear. That Saturday evening, January 31st, started like any other. At 5:32 p.m., Nancy took an Uber to her daughter Annie's home. A simple, ordinary detail. Family dinner, conversation, comfort. There were no signs that anything was wrong. Hours later, at approximately 9:48 p.m., her son-in-law, Tommaso Scione, drove her back home. At 9:50 p.m., something quietly significant happened. The garage door closed. We can imagine the scene. Headlights fading, the sound of a car pulling away, the stillness settling back in. Nancy, now alone, inside her home. That moment, 9:50 p.m., would become the last confirmed point at which everything was still normal. After that, the timeline fractures. What happens next is not witnessed in real time. Instead, we reconstruct it through fragments, digital traces, mechanical signals, silent devices capturing something no human saw. At 1:47 a.m., something unusual occurs. Nancy's doorbell camera is disconnected. Not malfunctioning, not glitching, disconnected, deliberately. We have to pause here and consider the psychology of this act. This isn't random. This is someone who understands surveillance. Someone who knows they are being watched and chooses to eliminate that threat. But they don't do it cleanly. At 2:12 a.m., motion is detected again. Despite the attempt to disable the camera, footage is later recovered from back-end systems. And what it reveals is chilling. An armed individual, masked, gloved, carrying a backpack, moving within Nancy's property in the dead of night. We don't hear screams, we don't see a struggle, but we know something is unfolding. And then, at 2:28 a.m., another detail surfaces, one that feels almost haunting in its silence. Nancy's bedside pacemaker monitor fails to transmit its scheduled signal. A small, technical detail, easy to overlook. But when we place it into the timeline, it becomes something else entirely. A moment where something stopped, or was interrupted, or prevented. By the next morning, February 1st, something feels off. Nancy doesn't attend her scheduled church live stream. This might not seem alarming at first, but for someone described as a consistent churchgoer, it's unusual enough to raise concern. A church member notices. They call the family. And this is where the shift begins, from routine to urgency. Around 11 a.m., relatives arrive at Nancy's home. What they expect to find is unclear. Maybe she overslept, maybe she's unwell. But what they actually find is nothing. No Nancy. No signs of her leaving. Her phone is still there. Her belongings are untouched. Everything that suggests a person lives there is still there, except the person. At 12:03 p.m., the family calls 911, and just like that, what began as concern becomes a missing person case. When deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department arrive, the situation escalates almost immediately. This is no longer a routine check. Something is wrong, deeply wrong. Inside the home, conditions are described as very concerning. We aren't given every detail, but we don't need them. Certain facts tell us enough. There are bloodstains, not outside, not down the street, but at or near the entrance of the home. And forensic testing later confirms the blood belongs to Nancy. This changes everything, because now we are no longer asking where she went. We are asking what happened to her inside that house. At this early stage, we begin to see the outline of something calculated. Let's consider the elements together. A vulnerable, elderly woman living alone in a quiet neighborhood with predictable routines. Then, a masked intruder, disabling surveillance, entering during the early hours of the morning. Evidence of violence inside the home, no signs of voluntary departure. This is not chaos. This is selection. This is planning. Whoever did this didn't stumble upon Nancy. They came for her. As the case officially shifts from a missing person investigation to a criminal one, we find ourselves facing the same questions investigators must now confront. Why Nancy Guthrie? Was she targeted specifically, or was she simply vulnerable? What did the intruder want? And perhaps most chilling of all, was she still alive? Because at this point in the story, we don't know, and neither did her family. We now understand that this wasn't a disappearance. It was an intrusion, a violation of space, of safety, of certainty. And as investigators begin to peel back the layers of what happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home, we find ourselves stepping into something far more unsettling than a simple abduction. Because the deeper we go, the less this looks like a clean, controlled crime. And the more it begins to feel like something fractured, messy, risky, and possibly desperate. Once the blood is confirmed to be Nancy's, the tone of the investigation shifts immediately. This is no longer a missing persons case. This is now a suspected kidnapping, possibly worse. The Pima County Sheriff's Department quickly escalates, bringing in homicide investigators. Not because they know Nancy is dead, but because the evidence suggests violence serious enough to consider that possibility. And soon after, federal agencies step in. The FBI joins the case. Customs and Border Protection, search and rescue teams, drones scan the desert terrain. K-9 units sweep nearby areas. Surveillance footage from surrounding homes is collected and analyzed. But despite the scale of the response, something is missing. A direction, a clear suspect, a trace of Nancy. We are left with fragments, and one of those fragments becomes the most haunting piece of this puzzle. Days after Nancy disappears, the FBI releases still images and later video recovered from her doorbell camera system. What we see is not dramatic in motion, but psychologically, it's chilling. A figure appears, masked, gloved, moving deliberately, carrying a backpack, armed. We don't see their face clearly, but we do see behavior, and behavior tells us more than identity ever could. First, the intruder approaches the camera. They attempt to disable it, not violently, but cautiously, tapping it, testing it. When that fails, they improvise. They use foliage, leaves from a nearby plant, to cover the lens. That detail matters because it reveals something crucial. This person didn't come fully prepared. They planned to avoid detection, but not perfectly. There's hesitation here, adaptation, which suggests something in between two extremes. Not a complete amateur, but not a flawless professional either. Let's break this down together. We have an individual who comes armed, wears a mask and gloves, targets a specific home, attempts to disable surveillance, moves within the property at night, but also struggles to disable the camera cleanly, uses improvised methods, leaves behind evidence, blood trail disturbance. This combination creates tension in the profile because it suggests conflicting traits. Planning, but not perfection. Control, but not mastery. And that raises an unsettling possibility. This wasn't their first crime, but it may have been their most ambitious. Just as investigators begin focusing on the physical evidence, another layer emerges, one that complicates everything. Ransom notes, multiple ones, sent not just to the family, but to media outlets. That alone is unusual, because most kidnappers, especially those seeking money, avoid attention. They don't invite it. They don't broadcast their demands. But here, we see something different. Notes demanding millions of dollars in cryptocurrency, deadlines, instructions, even details about Nancy, what she was wearing, aspects of her home, details that suggest knowledge, but also something else, performance. Because when someone sends messages to media outlets, they aren't just communicating, they're creating an audience. Then, suddenly, the investigation takes a sharp turn. A man in California is arrested. He had posed as Nancy's abductor, demanded ransom, inserted himself into the case, but here's the twist. He had nothing to do with Nancy's disappearance. We need to pause here, because psychologically, this moment tells us something important. Not about the real perpetrator, but about the nature of high-profile crimes. They attract noise, people seeking attention, control, relevance, and that noise becomes dangerous because it muddies the waters, it wastes time, and most importantly, it distracts from the truth. Now, we're left with a critical question. If one ransom demand was fake, what about the others? Investigators don't confirm. They don't deny. They treat every message as potentially real because the stakes are too high to dismiss anything. But internally, we can imagine the conflict. Are these notes from the real abductor, or are they opportunists exploiting the situation? Is Nancy alive somewhere, aware of these demands? Or is this entire ransom narrative a smokescreen? And perhaps the most unsettling possibility, what if the person who took Nancy never intended to negotiate at all? As the days pass with no answers, Nancy's family steps into the spotlight. Savannah Guthrie, her daughter, speaks publicly. We see her not as a journalist, but as a daughter, desperate, controlled, but breaking underneath. She addresses the person responsible directly. We are ready to talk. There's something deeply human in that moment, a willingness to engage with the unknown, to negotiate with darkness, if it means bringing someone home. Later, the message becomes even more direct. we will pay. Think about that psychologically. The family is now operating under a belief that Nancy might still be alive, that someone is holding her, that communication, however distorted, might save her. But at the same time, they ask for proof of life, because in modern crime, reality is no longer certain. Voices can be faked, images manipulated, truth becomes fragile. Investigators continue working relentlessly. They analyze surveillance footage from surrounding homes, digital records, DNA evidence, physical traces left behind. At one point, gloves are recovered, possibly matching those worn by the suspect. Hope rises, then collapses. The DNA leads to a local restaurant worker, not involved. Another dead end. We feel the frustration building. Every lead seems promising, until it isn't. On February 10th, a person of interest is detained after a traffic stop in Rio Rico, about 60 miles away. Search warrants are executed, homes are searched, vehicles seized. For a moment, it feels like the case might break open, but again, nothing. The individual is released, not involved. Days later, another operation, another home, more questioning, more tension, and once again, no arrests. At this point, we have to consider not just the suspect, but everyone involved. Investigators, working long hours, chasing leads that dissolve, balancing hope with realism, the family living in a state of suspended grief, not knowing whether to mourn or to wait. And the perpetrator, if they are watching, and there's a strong chance they are, what are they feeling? Power, fear, regret, or nothing at all? Because one thing becomes increasingly clear: this person is not communicating directly, and silence can be louder than any ransom note. Days turn into weeks, deadlines in ransom notes pass. No proof of life is provided, no confirmed contact is made, and the central question remains unchanged: where is Nancy? By now, we expect a breakthrough. In most cases, this is where something shifts. A mistake by the perpetrator, a piece of overlooked evidence, a witness who finally speaks. But in Nancy Guthrie's case, every step forward seems to dissolve into uncertainty. And what we begin to realize is far more disturbing than a lack of answers. It's the pattern of false momentum. Leads that feel real, convincing, almost solved, only to collapse at the last moment. On February 13th, investigators zero in on a location just 2 miles from Nancy's home. 2 miles. Close enough to feel personal, close enough to suggest that whoever took her didn't go far. Law enforcement moves in. Roads are shut down. Neighbors watch as police vehicles flood the area. 2 individuals are removed from the home, taken in for questioning. For a moment, everything feels like it's about to change. We can imagine the tension inside the interrogation room, inside the command center, inside the Guthrie family's world. Is this it? But once again, the answer is no. Both individuals are released. No charges, no confirmed connection. And just like that, another lead disappears. Around the same time, investigators focus on something else. A gray Range Rover, not hidden, not abandoned in the desert, but sitting in the parking lot of a nearby restaurant. At first glance, it might seem ordinary. But in investigations like this, nothing is ordinary. The vehicle is seized, towed away, processed for evidence. We ask ourselves, was this the vehicle used to transport Nancy? Was she ever inside it? Did the suspect believe it would go unnoticed? Or was this another coincidence, another thread that leads nowhere? Because, once again, no public connection is confirmed. The Range Rover fades into the background of the case. Another question mark. Then comes a detail that feels promising. Gloves are recovered, similar, possibly identical, to those worn by the intruder in the doorbell footage. This is it, we think. This is the physical link. DNA is extracted, analyzed, matched, and then another collapse. The DNA belongs to a local restaurant worker, not involved, cleared. We have to pause here because this moment reveals something deeper about the case. The suspect didn't just commit a crime. They moved through a world filled with overlapping traces, people, objects, environments. And in doing so, they created noise, confusion, a trail that looks meaningful but isn't. Up to this point, we've been trying to understand the suspect as someone calculated, but now the pattern begins to shift. Let's look at what we actually have. A targeted home invasion, a failed attempt to disable surveillance cleanly. Evidence left behind. No clear escape trail, no confirmed communication. Multiple false leads emerging around the case. This doesn't feel like precision anymore. It feels like something else. Controlled chaos. A person who plans enough to act, but not enough to disappear cleanly. Someone who takes risks. Someone who may have adapted in real time. And that raises a chilling possibility. What if something went wrong? We begin to consider a different scenario. Not a perfect kidnapping, not a clean ransom operation, but an event that escalated. Perhaps the intruder entered with a plan to intimidate, to control, to take. But inside the house, something changed. Nancy resisted, or something unexpected happened. The situation turned violent, and from that moment on, the plan unraveled. Because if this were a controlled abduction for ransom, we would expect clear communication, proof of life, consistent demands. Instead, we see silence, conflicting messages, missed deadlines, which leads us to a difficult question. Was Nancy ever meant to be kept alive? We also have to consider the environment. Catalina Foothills isn't just a suburban neighborhood. It sits at the edge of vast desert terrain, open land, remote areas, places where something or someone can disappear without a trace. Search teams comb these areas. Drones scan from above. K9 units track scents that fade into nothing. And what we begin to realize is that the landscape itself may be working against the investigation, not because it hides evidence intentionally, but because it offers too many possibilities, too many places where the truth could be buried. As the investigation continues, the community begins to shift. At first, there is concern, then fear, then something quieter, a kind of collective unease, because this wasn't random in the way people expect. This wasn't a crime in a dark alley or a distant city. This happened inside a home, at night, to someone vulnerable, and that changes how people think. Neighbors start locking doors earlier, watching more closely, questioning what they thought was safe. Because if it could happen to Nancy, it could happen to anyone. By now, we've seen multiple breakthroughs. A detained person of interest, a searched home, a seized vehicle, recovered gloves. Each one felt like the moment, the turning point. But none of them held, and this creates something dangerous in investigations, the illusion of progress. Because when you feel like you're getting closer, you may not realize you're moving in circles. At this stage, we return again to the person at the center of all this, the one who entered that home, the one who moved through the darkness. What are they thinking now? If they acted impulsively after initial planning, they may now be dealing with consequences they didn't anticipate. Fear, pressure, the awareness that law enforcement is closing in. But if they are more calculated, then this silence may be intentional, a strategy, waiting for attention to fade, waiting for mistakes to be made by investigators. Or perhaps they are simply gone, detached from the situation entirely. As time passes, one idea becomes harder to ignore. Not because it's proven, but because it fits too many gaps. What if the crime was never about ransom at all? What if the ransom notes, real or fake, are distractions? What if the real motive lies somewhere else entirely? Something personal, something targeted, something we haven't fully seen yet. Because in cases like this, the most dangerous truth is often the one hiding in plain sight. And at some point in every investigation, the noise fades, the sirens stop, the search teams scale back, the cameras leave, and what remains is silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind filled with questions that no one can answer. That's where we now find ourselves in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, a case that began with urgency, exploded into national attention, and slowly drifted into uncertainty. For Nancy's family, time didn't move forward. It stretched. Every hour without answers became heavier than the last. Savannah Guthrie, no longer just a journalist but a daughter searching for her mother, continued to speak publicly, not with certainty, not with closure, but with something far more fragile: hope. And yet, even hope began to shift. On February 24th, the family made a decision that speaks volumes about where they were emotionally. They offered a $1 million reward for information that could lead to Nancy's recovery. That number isn't just money, it's urgency, desperation, a signal to the world that they were willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to bring her back. But alongside that hope, there was also something else, an unspoken acknowledgement that Nancy might not be alive. And still, they continued, because when there is no proof, there is still possibility. We watch as the family releases videos, carefully worded, emotionally restrained, directed not at the public, but at someone specific, the person responsible. We are ready to talk. We understand. We will pay. These are not just statements. They are attempts to reach into the unknown and pull something back, a response, a sign, a single piece of evidence that Nancy is still out there, but nothing comes, no voice, no message, no proof of life. And at this point, we have to confront a painful truth. Silence can be an answer. Now, with everything we've seen, we step back and look at the full picture, not just as investigators, but as observers trying to understand the mind behind this crime. Let's revisit the key elements: a vulnerable victim living alone, a targeted nighttime intrusion, evidence of violence inside the home, a masked, armed individual caught on camera, an attempt, imperfect, to disable surveillance, no clean escape trail, no consistent communication, ransom notes that may or may not be real. When we put all of this together, a clear psychological pattern begins to emerge. This does not look like a controlled professional kidnapping operation. It looks like something far more unstable, more reactive, more human. The most consistent theory, the one that fits the gaps, is this: the crime began with intent, but did not go according to plan. Something happened inside that house, something that escalated beyond what the intruder expected, and from that moment on, everything became about damage control, not negotiation, not profit, but survival, avoiding capture, covering tracks, and possibly abandoning the original motive entirely. We now face the question that defines this case. What happened to Nancy Guthrie after she was taken? Was she alive when she left that house? Was she conscious? Was she able to fight? Or did everything end right there in the place she felt safest? We don't have those answers. And that's what makes this case so haunting. Because unlike many true crime stories, there is no resolution, no arrest, no courtroom, no confession, only absence. Search efforts eventually slow, not because investigators give up, but because reality sets limits. The terrain is vast, the leads are exhausted, the evidence incomplete, And in a place like Arizona, the land itself becomes part of the mystery. Open desert, endless space, a landscape that can hold on to secrets indefinitely. We are left with the unsettling possibility that somewhere out there, the truth exists, hidden, waiting, but perhaps never to be found. Nancy's disappearance didn't just affect her family, it rippled outward, through her community, through the media, through every person who followed the case. Because this wasn't just a story about crime, it was a story about vulnerability, about how quickly normal life can fracture, about how safety can be an illusion, and perhaps most importantly, about how some questions don't get answered. As of now, Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts remain unknown. The investigation is still open. Authorities continue to analyze evidence, to follow leads, to hope for a breakthrough, but time has changed the nature of the case. What was once urgent is now uncertain. What was once active is now waiting for something new, something unexpected, something that might finally bring clarity. As we step away from this case, we're left with something deeper than facts. We're left with perspective, because cases like this force us to confront uncomfortable truths, that not every story has an ending, that not every victim gets justice, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply remember Nancy Guthrie, not just as a name in a headline, but as a person, a mother, a woman who lived a full life before one night changed everything. So now we turn the question to you. What do you think really happened that night? Do you believe this was a planned kidnapping or something that spiraled out of control? Your perspective matters, because sometimes the most overlooked detail comes from someone seeing the story differently. Before you go, if you found this story compelling and want more deep psychological true crime stories like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel Psychology of True Crime, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement doesn't just support the channel, it helps keep these stories alive and keeps attention on cases that still deserve answers. Because somewhere out there, the truth still exists, and one day it might finally be found.